She cheated, lied, and moved on. 5 years later, I became her boss, and that's when it really started. I wasn't planning revenge. I want to start with that. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd one day be sitting across from her, signing off on her timesheets and watching her nervously avoid eye contact in meetings, I'd have laughed. Not because I didn't want that moment, God knows I did, but because it felt like something out of a movie. Real life doesn't work like that. Except, sometimes it does. We met in college, second year. She was in my Stats 2 class and I'd seen her around a few times in the library before that, always wearing this red beanie even in spring. She had a way of talking like she was always half laughing at something she wasn't going to explain. Her name was Clara. I wasn't anything special back then. Average GPA, working part-time at a coffee place just off campus. What I lacked in charm I made up for with consistency. I was the guy who showed up, on time, did the thing, and left. Clara wasn't like that. She had this kind of whirlwind energy, like she wasn't built for standing still. The fact that she even noticed me felt like a glitch in the system. The fact that she liked me, unbelievable. We started dating after a study session turned into coffee, and coffee turned into long walks home, and those walks turned into nights in her off-campus apartment that always smelled like vanilla and potpourri. I'd never felt anything like it. I was all in. She made me feel like I could be more than I was, and for a kid like me, raised by a single mom who worked night shifts at a nursing home, that meant something, but I should have seen it. There were signs, early ones. Her phone always flipped face down, friends I never met, inside jokes I wasn't part of, late nights that didn't come with explanations. But when you're in it, you justify everything. You want to believe the person lying next to you every night couldn't possibly be lying in other ways. Until the night I saw the message. She was in the shower and her phone buzzed. I wasn't snooping. It was one of those things, you hear it, your eyes go to the screen, just a glance, can't stop thinking about last night. When can we do it again? No name. Just a number. I didn't say anything at first. I froze, like really froze. I remember just standing there, phone still buzzing, my ears ringing so loud I thought I was going to pass out. When she came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, smiling like nothing had happened, I felt something inside me split, but I didn't confront her, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask who it was. I just started watching. Not in a creepy way, just observing, noticing, documenting. She didn't know I'd seen the message, and I wanted to keep it that way. Over the next few weeks I noticed the patterns. Tuesday and Thursday nights study groups, phone calls taken outside, a second email account she never told me about. I created backup screenshots, audio recordings when she'd leave voicemails for whoever he was, even saved the emails by blind copying them to an address she didn't know I had. The breakup wasn't dramatic. I simply said I didn't feel we were working. She cried, said she'd been meaning to talk about us, said she just got confused, that he didn't mean anything. I moved out that weekend, blocked her on everything, focused on graduating, barely made it. Then came the quiet years. I didn't follow her, didn't stalk her socials. I just lived, got an entry-level job at a mid-sized tech firm. Started over, made new friends, got promoted, then promoted again, took night classes, picked up project management certs, transferred to the East Coast office, then back again. 5 years passed. One morning, I was sitting in the conference room with the regional director going over resumes for a new department we were building. It was part of a reorg, big deal, new leadership, lots of lateral moves. I had final say on the team. We were expanding fast, and HR had fast-tracked a stack of internal applications from other offices. I opened the folder, and there it was, Clara M. 5 years older, new hairstyle, same eyes in the staff photo. She'd been working out of our Portland branch in finance, apparently looking to move into operations. Her resume was polished, probably professionally written. She'd even listed me as a known associate from university, probably to grease the wheels. She had no idea. She was one of 6 candidates for 3 roles. I didn't disqualify her, didn't throw out the file. I even marked her as qualified because the best revenge doesn't come from blocking someone. It comes from letting them walk in. She started 3 weeks later. I didn't see her until day 2, our schedules didn't overlap. But the moment she walked into that Monday all-staff holding a paper cup and that same tilted smile, I saw the flicker, recognition, panic. But she played it cool, so did I. I introduced myself formally like we hadn't seen each other since graduation. She pretended to remember me vaguely. The act was good, almost too good, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew. And I think that scared her more than if I'd confronted her right then and there. The next 6 months were interesting. I didn't micromanage her, didn't sabotage her projects. In fact, I gave her more responsibility than the others. Let her lead cross-departmental syncs, present directly to VPs, even suggested her name for a pilot mentorship program, because Clara was smart, ambitious, capable, and because the higher she climbed, the further she had to fall. I never told anyone. No one in the office knew about our history. To them, I was just a department head with an eye for talent and a reputation for fairness. But Clara knew. Every compliment, every assignment, every public recognition I gave her. I saw it tighten something in her chest. Like she was waiting for the trap. I didn't need to set one. I just needed her to do what she always did, and eventually she did. It started small. Missed deadlines mostly, sloppy budget revisions, a presentation deck where she used the wrong version of the numbers and quoted a figure from Q2 instead of Q3. Things that could happen to anyone. The kind of mistakes that usually don't matter, unless someone is watching, unless someone has a reason to take notes. I didn't correct her in front of others, never once called her out in meetings. That would have been too obvious, too theatrical. Instead, I emailed politely, asked for clarifications, forwarded her own words back to her with a smiley face and a just double-checking smile. And every time she apologized, every single time, I filed it away, not in a literal folder, not some master revenge plan with tabs and post-its, just a quiet accumulation of things, missteps, patterns. After about a year, things started to shift. Not between her and me, we still played our silent little game, but in the org, new leadership, budget constraints, talk of restructuring, and then, inevitably, cuts. We were told they'd be looking at performance reviews, internal audits, and team feedback. I wasn't part of the final decision-making board, but I was asked to submit summaries for each of my team leads. That included Clara. I didn't lie. I just told the truth. The whole truth, no exaggerations, just the chain of missed budget targets, the inconsistency in cross-team reporting. A direct quote from an email she'd sent to a vendor that undercut our negotiating position. I framed it all as concerning but potentially correctable with the right coaching. I even recommended retaining her with caveats, but I knew what would happen. I'd watched this company long enough. I'd sat through enough board meetings to know the signs. When cuts came, they wouldn't want risk. They'd cut where there was exposure, unpredictability, weakness. They'd cut Clara, and they did. 2 weeks later, she was called into our. They used the usual language, restructuring, role redundancy, not a reflection of her personally. Offered a severance package. Exit interview scheduled for the next day. I didn't attend it, didn't say goodbye, didn't even send a message. She left quietly. No scene, no confrontation. Just walked out at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday with a cardboard box that didn't quite close all the way and that same old red beanie folded on top. That could have been the end. But it wasn't, because revenge, real revenge, isn't about watching someone lose, it's about watching what they do after. A month later, I got a connection request from a recruiter. Said she'd spoken with Clara about opportunities in a new fintech startup. Asked for a reference. I didn't reply right away. I waited. 3 days later, I responded with the most neutral, HR-safe line I could muster. Clara is a capable and driven professional. In my experience, she works best under clear guidance and structured oversight. I knew what that meant. To a recruiter, it was death by implication. I never heard back from her. Not for months, and then one morning I woke up to a DM on an old social platform I barely used anymore. You won. Is that what you wanted? Because if it is, congrats. You did it, no name. But I didn't need one. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted it and archived it. Not because I wanted to remember, but because I wanted proof. Proof that I had finally gotten under her skin. That after everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the smug smile when she thought she'd gotten away with it, after all of that, I still mattered enough for her to break the silence. You want to know the coldest part? It's not that I got her fired. Not that I cost her that fintech job. Not even that I outlasted her, outpaced her, or that I was in the position of power while she flailed. No, it's that I never once told her why. Never once said I saw the message. Never told her I knew about the hotel receipts, the second email, the little lie she told my roommate when she thought I wouldn't hear about it. I never raised my voice. Never called her a name. Never even said it hurt. Because sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't destroy them. It's let them destroy themselves while you stand by, calm, collected, and silent. And that's exactly what I did. Life moved on. Or at least it looked like it did. Projects piled up, new hires came in, quarterly goals shifted. But every now and then Clara would drift through my thoughts like the smell of something half forgotten. Not out of regret, not even out of nostalgia, just a faint echo of something that had once been unfinished. But I wasn't watching her anymore. No more checking LinkedIn, no more mutuals, no Google alerts. Whatever came next was hers to deal with, until she came back. It was a Thursday again, rainy gray light over the parking lot. I was sitting in a vendor kickoff meeting when I got the Slack message from Diane, our front desk manager. There's someone here to see you. Says she doesn't have an appointment. Just said it's urgent. Her name is Clara. I stared at the message for a full 30 seconds. It didn't make sense. I hadn't spoken her name out loud in over a year. It felt like a ghost had found its way in. I excused myself from the meeting, walked out to the lobby. And there she was, same beanie, different coat, shoulders slightly hunched like she was trying to fold herself smaller than she used to be. Her eyes flicked up when she saw me, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not smugness, fear. Can we talk? She asked. I didn't say anything, just nodded toward the glass conference room by the hallway and walked. She followed, footsteps soft, almost unsure. When the door closed behind us, she stayed standing. Didn't sit. Neither did I. I know this is weird, she started. And I know you probably hate me. I said nothing. Something's happening, and I think someone's messing with me. Still, I said nothing. She glanced at me like she was looking for a crack in the surface. I don't mean like criminal, just little things. Job interviews that vanish, background checks that never go through, a car loan that got denied because of a flag they couldn't explain. I didn't even know this stuff could happen unless someone was doing it on purpose. There it was, the suggestion, the unspoken question, was it me? I gave her a slow look like I was thinking. Then finally, you think I'm doing this? I don't know, she said quickly. No, I don't think so. I just didn't know who else to ask. The room was silent for a few seconds. Rain tapped against the window behind her, and then I asked quietly, why would I do that? She hesitated. Then said, because I hurt you. It wasn't a confession, not really. But it was more than I ever got from her before. I shrugged. You moved on, I moved up. End of story. She shook her head. You don't get it. This is bigger than a grudge. Then why come to me? Clara bit her lip. Because everything started going wrong after Portland, after I left the company, and I don't think it's a coincidence. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Clara, no one cares that much, least of all me. And in that moment I saw the realization hit her. She didn't know what scared her more, that I might be doing it, or that I wasn't, and someone else was. She left without another word, no handshake, no closure, just a quick nod and the sound of her boots down the hall. I told no one about the visit, but that night I opened a private browser tab and looked her up. Something had shifted. Her resume was no longer public. A few dead social media links. A blog she'd started years ago, now full of vague, paranoid posts, not accusing, not naming, just patterns, questions, stories of jobs lost, conversations overheard, people she thought were following her. She was spiraling, and I hadn't done a thing, at least not recently. But someone had. Over the next few weeks, things got weirder. A former coworker messaged me randomly to ask if Clara was okay. Said she'd shown up at a conference panel he was speaking on, sat in the back row, then left halfway through without saying a word. Another person, someone from HR, said they got an anonymous email accusing Clara of stealing office equipment back in Portland. No proof, no follow-up. It wasn't me, I was sure of that, but someone was playing a game, someone with access, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized something that made my stomach turn. I never shared the full extent of what Clara did to me with anyone, but someone, somehow, knew. At first, I thought it might have been coincidence. Offices talk, people gossip. Clara had worked under my supervision, and even if no one knew the history, maybe someone had picked up on the energy between us. Maybe they connected dots I didn't mean to leave. But then I remembered the file. Years ago, when I'd first discovered she was cheating, I saved everything. Not on my work computer, not in cloud storage. A USB drive, physical, offline, obscurely named and buried deep in a drawer under tax forms and spare charging cables. I hadn't thought about it in years, but that night, after her visit, after those weird messages from colleagues, I dug it out, and it was gone. Not the drawer, not the folder. That specific USB gone. That drawer had only ever been in 2 apartments. The first was a studio I'd rented after graduation. The second was the condo I bought 2 years ago. After the second promotion, the movers hadn't touched the drawer. I'd packed it myself. I tore the place apart. It was obsessive. Desk, closet, boxes I hadn't opened since 2019. Nothing. Someone had been in my home. Someone who knew what they were looking for. I didn't report it. There was nothing to report. No break-in, no forced entry. Just a missing flash drive and a pit in my stomach that deepened by the hour. 2 days later, I got an email. No subject, no sender name. Just a burner address and a short message. Funny how people forget what they've done once they've moved up in the world. Attached was a screenshot. One of the old messages Clara had sent to the guy she cheated with. One I hadn't looked at in years. The one where she laughed about me, called me the stable option. Said I was sweet but boring. That screenshot was never digital. I'd printed it once, scanned it, saved it offline. Only one copy existed, and now someone had it. Who? It couldn't be Clara. She never knew about the drive, never knew I'd saved those things. And even if she had guessed, why send it to me? She was scared, not gloating. No, this was someone else. Someone who had been close enough to me to access that drawer. Someone who knew Clara. Someone who wanted both of us to know they knew. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I checked the locks, installed a security camera, reset my passwords, bought a safe, and then I started thinking back. 5 years is a long time. In that time I had 2 serious relationships. One roommate back in my first place. A cleaning service I used once every couple of months. A handful of techs from work who'd been over for dinners, birthdays, project meetings. Nothing stood out, until I remembered my second year at the company, when I mentored a summer intern named Caleb. Quiet kid. Bright. Too bright, honestly. He picked things up fast, faster than some of the full-timers. Curious about everything, especially systems. Not just the tech but the people, always asking questions, listening more than he spoke. He'd been over to my apartment twice, once for a small team dinner, once alone, to return a company laptop he'd borrowed when his died. That second time, I left him in the living room for 20 minutes while I took a Zoom call in my bedroom. 20 minutes. I hadn't thought about Caleb in years. He left the company after the internship, no drama. But he had sent me a message on LinkedIn about a year later, just a casual note saying he appreciated the mentorship, that he was now working freelance. I pulled up his profile, it was gone. No recent posts, no activity, no connections we shared, like he'd scrubbed it. I tried Facebook, Instagram, nothing, either deleted or locked down so tight it might as well not exist, and then I remembered something else. During his internship, Caleb had been assigned to the compliance audit team for a 2-week rotation. Back then, we were trialing a new data retention system. Internal files were moving between storage protocols. Everyone had some level of access they shouldn't have. Caleb had access. He might have copied the contents of that USB if I'd had it plugged in at the time. But why? Why would a former intern, long gone, bother to do this? And then it hit me. Clara had never told me the full story. Either not about the guy she cheated with. Not about the aftermath. What if it wasn't just about me? What if the reason she was spiraling, the reason her life had quietly started to implode after she left the company, wasn't just because of my silent revenge, but because someone else had been watching her too. Someone who thought I knew more than I did. Someone who had been waiting. I took 2 days off work, called it personal leave, which it technically was, but in reality, I wasn't sleeping. Couldn't. My apartment suddenly felt foreign. Like the walls had ears. Like everything in it might be compromised. I spent hours going through old digital backups trying to reconstruct what had been on that missing USB drive. Most of it was routine. Assignments from my early job, budgeting templates, a few private journals, and of course, the Clara folder. Screenshots, copies of audio memos, a couple emails she thought she'd deleted. What haunted me wasn't just that someone else had it. It was the possibility that I had underestimated how much of me was also in there. My journals weren't just notes. They were raw, confessional, paranoid in places. If you read those without context, you might assume I had a vendetta, maybe even more than that. It was enough to make me a liability, and now that someone had it, the silence was worse than any confrontation. Whoever sent that screenshot wasn't trying to blackmail me. They were playing. I knew how to spot it, because I'd done it myself. I checked old emails for Caleb. Nothing. But then I remembered he once submitted a freelance resume using a Gmail address that wasn't tied to any company. I searched my archives and found it buried in a forwarded referral form from a junior manager, dated 3.5 years ago. And so I wrote him, "Hey Caleb, hope you're doing well. Had a question about a compliance project from your intern days. Think you'd be willing to catch up for 10 minutes? No reply. 2 hours later, the Gmail account bounced. Not a failure, just a user does not exist. So I did something I swore I wouldn't. I reached out to Clara, not by phone, not by email. I sent her a letter, typed, no return address, dropped into a mailbox in another neighborhood. Inside I wrote, "You weren't wrong. Someone is messing with us. I don't know who, but I think I know where it started. If you want to talk, write to this P.O. box. Burn this letter." I didn't expect her to respond, but she did. It took a week, plain envelope, block letters, no signature, I knew it. He told me once that things never really disappear, only go quiet. I didn't listen, I should have. I think he was watching even back then. No name again, just he. I wrote back, asked questions, direct ones. Who was he? Why did she think he was watching her? She replied with a memory. The guy that I first cheated with. It wasn't just a fling, it was planned. I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was just being reckless, but he knew things about me. Weird things. About my family, my old school, even the stuff I told only one person in freshman year. I thought it was coincidence, but I think he'd been watching me way before we even met. I read that letter 3 times. Then once more. This wasn't about revenge, not anymore. This was about surveillance, not professional, personal, intimate, deliberate, the kind of pattern that doesn't happen by accident. I went back through what I knew of Caleb, looked through old Slack logs, nothing useful. Then I tried something desperate. I dug into our internal system archive from the year of his internship. Not easy. Most of that was off limits unless you were IT, which I wasn't. But I still had admin credentials on some legacy tools, and they gave me just enough of a backdoor to see what projects he had been touching. And that's when I found it. He'd accessed the employee behavior analytics dashboard, not just his team, not just for the audit rotation, for everyone, including Clara, including me. Logs showed he'd been in the system after hours, midnight logins, Saturdays, even a few on holidays, tracking message metadata, badge swipe times, file access trails. The kind of thing no intern should have had reason to look at, but he did, and no one had flagged it because no one was looking. I stared at the screen for a long time. The audit trail ended abruptly on a date I recognized, his last day. But there was one more thing, a file export, one large zip folder. Timestamped 4:12 a.m. The title, assets_cascade_v3. That file was never uploaded anywhere I could find, but the logs showed it being copied to an external device, a USB drive not company issued. It wasn't mine, he had a copy, all of it, Clara's secrets, mine, probably dozens of others, and he'd been sitting on it for years. The only question left was why he was resurfacing now. And why he thought we deserved to be reminded. I started keeping my phone in airplane mode at night, not because I was afraid of being tracked, At this point, I assumed that ship had sailed, but because I couldn't sleep with the screen lighting up every few hours. At first it was subtle, missed calls from unknown numbers, text messages that were just blank, then deleted before I could take a screenshot. Then came the photos, grainy shots of my apartment door, my car parked crooked in the garage, even one of me crossing the street outside the office. They always came from different numbers. And they were always deleted seconds later. I didn't show them to anyone, not HR, not the police, not even Clara, because if I did, I'd have to admit something I wasn't ready to say aloud. I had started this, not the stalking, not the surveillance, but the pattern. I'd taught someone how to play this game. And now I wasn't the only player. I replied to Clara's last letter with one line. Do you know his real name? Her next letter came in a different envelope, still typed, still anonymous, but this time the tone was different, harsher, rushed. Like she had written it in a panic and mailed it before thinking, I don't know if it's his real name. He called himself Seth, said it wasn't the name he used at work. He had 3 phones, always said he wasn't traceable that way. Once I asked what he did for a living and he said, I clean up mistakes. I thought it was a joke. Now I'm not sure. Seth, no last name, no origin, no social trail. I opened a fresh notebook and started writing everything I could remember. Timeline, names, file paths, people who had interacted with Caleb or Clara or me. At first it was just a curiosity map, trying to understand how deep this thing went, but then a new message arrived. This time not to my phone, it was in my office inbox from an internal company address. No subject, no text, just an attachment, a zip folder cascade_undone_v1 zip. It looked like the title of the one Caleb had copied, but altered. The IT system flagged it as potentially dangerous. Automatically quarantined, I bypassed the warning and opened it in a secure sandbox. Inside logs, dozens of them. Audit trails, timestamps, chat exports from people I knew, some I worked with, some I barely remembered. Conversations where I was mentioned. My name highlighted, comments, speculations, questions like, why did he give her that project if she missed the last deadline? And isn't it weird he always picks the quiet ones for mentorship? Most of the logs were benign until the last folder. It was labeled simply Control. Inside were audio clips, recordings of me, private conversations, my kitchen, my living room. One from inside my car, me humming along to a song, making a voice memo about project risks. The timestamps were recent, days old. My blood ran cold. Whoever Seth was, if that was even his name, he hadn't just accessed old files. He was active, still watching, still collecting, and he wanted me to know. I drove to a public library 2 towns over, used one of their terminals to search Caleb's name, not the LinkedIn version, but the name from his original internship paperwork. Found a fragment of a paper he co-wrote in college, buried in an obscure open-source analytics journal. Nothing notable, except his co-author, St. Henley. Seth, I searched the name. Sparse mentions. A few security talks at fringe conferences. An article he'd posted under an alias on a gray market data forum, talking about passive behavioral manipulation. The article was removed, but not before someone had archived it. I read it 3 times. The thesis was chilling. He argued that the most effective way to control someone long-term wasn't through direct action, but by subtly altering their perception of events, by nudging them toward certain conclusions, making them feel observed, unsafe, confused. He called it applied paranoia, a phrase that burned itself into my brain. I wrote one last letter to Clara, told her everything, the recordings, the file, the control folder. I asked her to meet me in person, just once, public place. Her choice, no reply, but I didn't need one because 2 days later I got another envelope. Inside was a single photo of Clara sitting at a bus stop, head down, eyes closed, and right behind her, blurry in the background, was a figure, hood up, phone out, not facing the camera, but facing her. Under the photo, scribbled in black pen, were 3 words, "Don't involve her." I didn't go into work the next day. I didn't call in either. I just sat in my apartment, lights off, blinds half closed, that photo lying on the coffee table like it might move if I looked away. I must have stared at it for hours, zoomed in, enhanced it, tried to spot details. The phone in his hand, dark, matte, no case. The shoes, cheap, scuffed. The angle of the body, just turned enough to suggest he knew there was a camera. Maybe he posed, maybe it was a warning, or maybe it was a signature, a message to me. You're not in control anymore. I kept thinking about the phrase under the image, don't involve her. Like she was being protected or targeted. It took me until midnight to realize the obvious. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Not mine, not Clara's, not even Caleb's if he had anything to do with it. It was about watching, control, experimentation maybe. And I was the lab rat who thought he was the scientist. That night I finally slept. But not well. I kept waking up thinking I'd heard something, like someone breathing just outside the window. At 3:27 a.m., I turned on all the lights. At 4:12, I unplugged my router. At 5:02, I started writing everything out by hand. Every event, every timestamp, every strange behavior I could remember. By sunrise, I had 12 pages of connections, and a single name at the center, St. Henley. I made a decision. I took the day to prepare. Threw a burner laptop in a duffel bag, packed clothes for 3 days, prepaid phone, changed the plates on my car, drove 5 hours north to a friend's cabin I hadn't visited in years. Left no digital trail, no location sharing, no cards, just gas station receipts and old school cash. I spent 2 days up there reviewing everything. The pattern was clearer now. This wasn't just someone watching people who wronged others. It was deeper. He was watching people who thought they were in control. People like me. People like Clara. People who crossed lines quietly, thought they buried their own secrets. People who believed they'd gotten away with something. I started to wonder how many were there. How many like us? Because here's the thing. The recordings of me, those weren't collected for revenge. They were curated, edited, trimmed. The kind of cuts you'd make if you were building a profile. Or worse, a story. What if the Cascade folder wasn't just an archive? What if it was a case study? My own voice played back to me. My own emails set against Clarice, my own choices laid out like a thesis applied paranoia. The phrase looped in my head like static. And then, on the third night at the cabin, I heard a noise outside, light footsteps, gravel, the creak of a gate that should have been locked. I didn't turn on the lights, just stayed crouched by the door, phone camera ready. Not recording but waiting. Breath shallow, window cracked, then nothing, just wind. At 3:19 a.m., I finally fell asleep, if you can call it that. At 6:01, I woke up to a note tucked under the cabin door, plain white paper, typed. She was never the one I was studying. You were, she was the variable. You were the constant, no signature, no fingerprints, no tracks. But that was the moment I understood. The game had never been between me and Clara. She wasn't even the end goal, just the trigger, the catalyst. A test subject in someone else's long experiment, and I was the subject that wouldn't quit. The one who kept watching the watcher. The one who kept pulling at threads long after they were meant to unravel. That's why he sent the files, why he let me find the logs, why he let me suspect Caleb, Clara, even myself. Because he wanted me to dig, to participate, to chase. Because that's what made me interesting, that's what made me worth keeping. I didn't leave the cabin for another day. Partly because I was afraid. Partly because I didn't know where I could go that he couldn't find, whoever he was. But mostly because I'd realized something deeper. Something I hadn't wanted to admit until that note pushed me over the edge. I wasn't trying to escape anymore. I was trying to understand. And that was exactly what he wanted. The fourth morning, I returned to the city. I didn't go home. I didn't go to work. I went to a storage facility I'd rented years ago when I first moved after the breakup with Clara. It had become a kind of time capsule. Old college boxes, shredded journals, outdated laptops I'd been too paranoid to toss. Everything I didn't want to be found. But now I needed it found. I pulled the oldest laptop from a dust-covered Rubbermaid bin and powered it on. It was slow, maybe 10 years old, and hadn't been updated in forever. But it worked. I accessed my oldest accounts. Dig sites, forums, the digital equivalent of footprints through wet concrete. I went looking for Seth. Not Caleb, Seth. I followed usernames through archive logs. IRC channels long since dormant, private Git repositories I wasn't supposed to still have access to. Eventually, after hours of nothing but weak coffee and a growing sense of being watched through the dusty single bulb above me, I found a comment thread posted under the alias Marion Glass. It was a reply to a buried thread about surveillance psychology. The most effective control mechanism is one that mimics discovery. Give them freedom. Let them dig. Let them think they're hunting you. The trap only works if the subject chooses to enter underneath that. A timestamp from 7 years ago, and an IP address, not the full string, partially masked, but I recognized the first 3 octets. They matched the internal address scheme from my old employer. During the year Caleb was an intern, he didn't post it. Seth did. And I realized then Caleb may never have been involved. At least not willingly. He was probably watched too. Tested, used, just like me, just like Clara. I sat there in that storage unit with that old laptop and realized the ugliest truth of all. Seth wasn't punishing anyone. He wasn't cleaning up mistakes. He was curating people. He was finding the ones who already had cracks and then applying pressure, waiting to see what we'd do, what we'd become. That's why Clara was discarded. Why her life began to spiral when she thought she was free. She was useful only as long as she kept reacting. The moment she stopped, she lost value. Me. I was still playing. I hadn't stopped digging. I hadn't stopped looking over my shoulder. I hadn't stopped writing it all down. I was his longest case, the constant. And I finally understood what the Cascade Project was. It wasn't about revenge or files or secrets. It was a study of influence, of the ripple effects that happen when one person believes they're being hunted, watched, chosen, and how far they'll go to regain control. I closed the laptop, stared at the metal door of the unit, and asked myself the only question that mattered now. What do I do with this? Because I knew now with absolute clarity, he was still watching, probably watching me write these very words, probably had been from the start. So I stood up, left the unit, threw the laptop in a bin behind the building, smashed the burner phone, walked into the nearest library, created a fresh Reddit account, typed this entire story out from memory, didn't save drafts, didn't edit, just hit post. Because if this is the final move, if I'm really still inside his trap, then maybe the only way out is to drag him into the light, or maybe, just maybe, he wanted me to tell it all along. Maybe this was the experiment, not the watching, not the files, not the cameras, but the confession. This, right here. This post me trying to warn someone else, you reading this right now. Do you feel it too? The hum in your chest when you sense you're not alone? That moment you start to retrace your steps? The odd interactions, the things that went missing, the coincidences that weren't. Maybe that's the real coldest revenge, letting you think you got away, and then one day, years later, becoming the one who watches you.